At midnight on Tuesday, businesses in Scotland were legally required to sign up to the SNP Greens deposit return scheme. Thousands of producers rightly decided not to because the scheme is an absolute shambles. Lorna Slater, the Minister in charge, said just 664 businesses had registered, but refused 6 times in this chamber yesterday to say how many should have signed up. So will the First Minister give us that answer now? How many businesses should have signed up to her government's deposit return scheme?
First Minister.
Well, first of all, Presiding Officer, when a big change is introduced, it's understandable there will be concerns about it, and I have deep respect for the concerns that are being raised by business, and Government will continue to work with business to address those. But frankly, the sheer opportunism of some opposition parties who have supported this scheme, rightly supported a deposit return scheme, previously criticised the Government for taking too long to introduce it, to now indulge in knee-jerk opposition. The opportunism of that, Presiding Officer, frankly, is breathtaking. And so too is the, and I'll use a parliamentary term that I believe is polite enough, so too is the blatant distortion of some opposition politicians. And yes, I am talking about Alistair Jack in particular. But coming back to the point, and this is an important point, the number of companies in the drinks industry inevitably changes over time. And at the outset of introducing this scheme, it was estimated that there were around 4,500 companies. However, significantly less than that will have to register, because once groups of companies registering under one registration are identified, the estimated number of individual producers, importers, will be below 2,000. But that's not actually the most relevant statistic. The most relevant statistic is the share of the market, the percentage of products that are included. That is over 90% are now included in this scheme. And finally, Presiding Officer, if I was to state that in the opposite way, if I was to stand here and say that 90% of producers were registered, but that only covered around 20% of the market, that would be a problem, because that would be a seriously problematic way of approaching this. So we will continue to progress with the scheme that is for the benefit of our environment, and we will do that responsibly, because that's what people across Scotland have a right to expect.
Douglas Ross.
First Minister, when you're in a hole, stop digging. Surely you or your many, many officials watched Lorna Slater absolutely unable to answer a basic question yesterday, but one that is so important. We need to know how many businesses, producers, the First Minister's government expected to sign up to a scheme when we know only 664 did by the deadline. It's a very simple number that either the First Minister knows and is refusing to tell this chamber, or the First Minister does not know. And I think this chamber deserves an answer. And also, the First Minister says she has deep respect for businesses across Scotland. Well, businesses are giving this government a very clear message, loud and clear. Their deposit return scheme is a complete disaster. The Scottish Wholesale Association said it could be a car crash. UK Hospitality Scotland say it is flawed. Innis and Gunn say it's unworkable. The Scottish Chamber of Commerce, last night, after listening to the Minister's statement, said business concerns have been completely ignored. Car crash, flawed, unworkable. The voice of businesses across Scotland ignored. So, First Minister, even at this late stage, will you finally, just once, listen to Scottish businesses and pause this scheme?
First Minister.
Of course, the last time the Government announced a delay to the scheme, necessitated, of course, by the pandemic, Conservatives were amongst the first to criticise the delay. That's what I mean by sheer opportunism and knee-jerk opposition. But that's what we've come to expect from the Conservatives. So we'll continue to act responsibly. But coming back to the central point in Douglas Ross's question, because it is important. And I did give him an answer in my first response. I gave him an answer in my first response, but I also pointed out that I think anybody looking at this rationally would see is that it's the number of bottles, the percentage of the product covered that matters most, because the vast majority of product is actually produced by a relatively small number of producers. And as of yesterday, more than 90% of product, more than 90% of the share of the market is covered. And that is the crucial point. If it was the reverse, that would be a problem. So we will continue as we have done. There have already been a range of concerns that have been responded to in terms of reducing the cost. So producer fees are 8%, 30%, 40% lower than originally planned for glass, plastic and metal containers. The day one payment for producers have been reduced, and we will continue to liaise with business responsibly and sensibly. But let's not lose sight of the central point here, which is the purpose and the objective of this scheme. It's about reducing littering. It will reduce littering by a third. It will increase recycling rates of single-use drinks containers towards 90%. It will reduce CO2 emissions by 4 million tonnes over 25 years. That's the equivalent to taking 83,000 cars off the road. This is about the environment. It used to be the case that the Conservatives pretended to care about the environment, but it seems those days are long gone.
Douglas Ross.
Very clear, the First Minister is ignoring Scottish businesses again. But I'm sorry, when she says that opposition and calls to pause the scheme are sheer political opportunism, I'd hate to be the Health Secretary sat next to her. There's going to be some more finger-wagging coming in a minute. Because, of course, we know that Humza Yousaf, Ash Regan and Kate Forbes have all said the deposit return scheme should be delayed. Political opportunism from the heart of the Scottish Government. Kate Forbes... For fuck's sake.
We'll suspend business at the moment. Thank you. We will recommence, and I will call Douglas Ross for his third question.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I have to say it's getting very tiresome, these constant interruptions in First Minister's questions. We are here, democratically elected, to put questions to the First Minister, and when it gets disrupted like that, people watching and people who want to hear the questions and the answers are getting pretty fed up by that childish behaviour. But I was kind of on a roll explaining the total political opportunism of the SNP. The total political opportunism of the SNP. We spoke about Humza Yousaf, we spoke about Ash Regan, now let's speak about Kate Forbes. Kate Forbes has said of the deposit return scheme that the First Minister has just defended over the last two questions could create economic carnage. Economic carnage. Now, that's actually one of the more tame things that Kate Forbes has said about the SNP's record. But there's just one wee problem. Kate Forbes is the SNP's Economy Secretary. The SNP's record is Kate Forbes' record. When the SNP government were slow in paying out COVID grants to businesses, Kate Forbes was running the schemes. When companies demanded the SNP government reset their anti-business agenda, Kate Forbes was the minister who wasn't listening. And when the ferry scandal ran even further aground, Kate Forbes was fully on board. The new Kate Forbes seems to be saying the old Kate Forbes isn't up to the job. So can I ask the First Minister, which one does she agree with? The Kate Forbes with a terrible record in government, or the Kate Forbes who says this government has a terrible record?
First Minister.
Firstly, Presiding Officer, Douglas Ross said that he was on a roll. I'm not sure whether he meant rolling down the hill, but that seems to be what that question. I said last week.
Thank you. We will. Excuse me, First Minister. Thank you. We will hear the First Minister.
I said last week, Presiding Officer, that Douglas Ross was seeming awful scared of Humza Yousaf. It seems this week that he's also very scared of Kate Forbes, which says to me that whoever is standing here in my place in a few weeks' time will keep the Conservatives firmly where they belong in opposition in Scottish politics. Back to deposit return. This government and I, for as long as I am First Minister, will continue to work to introduce sensible schemes that protect the interests of business, but also protect our environment, because we have a deep responsibility to do that. I would also point out again that we are in no way unprecedented in introducing a deposit return scheme. Similar schemes are already operational in many countries and territories around the world. Indeed, some of the companies, I understand, that are raising concerns, as they have a right to do here in Scotland, are part of these schemes in other countries elsewhere around the world. And I read in the newspaper today the Conservative UK Government is about to announce its own scheme, perhaps as soon as tomorrow, which no doubt will have Douglas Ross squirming, as he often does when his colleagues in London make life difficult for him. So we will continue to be responsible, liaising, engaging with business, but taking steps that are about protecting our environment and making sure that the cost of dealing with waste, which of course has to be met, is dealt with fairly. That's what this is all about.
Douglas Ross.
Presiding Officer, can I begin with an apology? It's been brought to my attention that I perhaps used industrial language in response to the protesters who interrupted the session earlier. And to you, the Chamber, and everyone listening, including my mother probably, I apologise for that. It's certainly, I won't repeat it. Christine Graham's asking what I said, and I promise I won't repeat it. So I just do want to apologise to you and the Chamber. But let's get back to where we were, because I was asking the First Minister about the leadership election and the SNP candidates, and the First Minister doesn't seem to want to talk about that. And it's no wonder, because this contest is an absolute bin fire. The SNP are so split and divided, they even tried to ban the media from watching the hustings. The only thing that unites the candidates seeking to replace Nicola Sturgeon is independence. And the candidates have even more reckless plans than Nicola Sturgeon's de facto referendum. Last night, Kate Forbes revealed that she wants to hold a referendum just 3 months after the next general election. 3 months, when there are so many bigger issues facing the country. Kate Forbes thinks that a deposit return scheme would cause economic carnage, but holding another referendum to break up a 300-year union will be a breeze. Does the First Minister really think anybody in Scotland will find Kate Forbes' plans credible?
First Minister.
Well, I think what we found out in that latest question from Douglas Ross is that his so-called role came to a crashing halt pretty quickly. Can I also perhaps share some news with Douglas Ross, with the Chamber and indeed the country, although I'm not sure it will come as any surprise to the country. The SNP is united in favouring Scottish independence, and I think we're going to increasingly see the country united behind independence as the best way to free ourselves from the impact of Tory governments, or indeed from the impact of Labour governments that are often indistinguishable from Tory governments, and be in charge of our own affairs and our own destiny, getting back into the European Union, for example. So I look forward very much to the vigour of that debate in years to come. And I'm also confident, Presiding Officer, that whoever stands here in my place in just a few weeks' time will continue the outstanding record of success of the SNP and make sure that it's the SNP that continues to occupy these benches, taking forward decisions for the good of people of Scotland, even when these are tough decisions, and that Douglas Ross and his colleagues will stay certainly over there, but who knows, perhaps over there in years to come.